What makes something really scary? There are different kinds of scary, like a fear of heights or fire or water or space. There's a fear of death, because I guess fear, like the instinct to be afraid or like fight or flight, or I guess the instinct would be flight, not fight. That's kind of based upon a fear of death. I don't know. I've asked people this before. Is it easier to nail horror in a movie form, game, or a book? I haven't ever read a horror novel, but I'm really interested in it because it seems like when your imagination is left to be free, you'd kind of scare yourself. Like, theoretically, it might be more unsettling to read a horror book than it is to watch a horror movie. So, like, if you ask, how would you rank forms of media in the horror genre? In my opinion, it would probably go, having never read a horror novel, games, books, and movies. It's kind of a toss-up between games and books. In a book, you don't have any images, you just have words, and your mind is left to create the image. So that might be scarier, but then in a game, the enemy is targeting you, or like whatever is scary is surrounding you, and you're not really watching someone else be scared. Unless you're like me, and you don't really play horror games very often, and you just watch people like Markiplier do it. I don't know why I started thinking about this. I drew a picture last night from a photograph that I took the night before. It kind of got me thinking, because it's kind of a stupid photograph. It was random. Like, I just put the camera out of focus and took a picture of myself. And I guess it might be because it's just me? I don't know. I wanted to talk about that question. What makes something really scary? I wanted to think about it out loud, because I've talked to a lot of people about it, and different things scare different people, but I heard someone talk about one time how close comedy and horror are to each other. You can have something really unsettling. Depending on the person, it can tip into that's funny or that's horrifying. I was talking to my brother the other night. He's 32. And he's a pretty serious guy. Well, not like, I mean, he's serious, but he's one of those guys that he's not really threatened by a lot of things. How would you describe a person like that? All my life, he's been he's pretty mellow. Some people that don't know him very well might think he's a sociopath or a psychopath. I wouldn't say he's a sociopath or a psychopath, but he just doesn't show a lot of negative emotion. So he was saying the other day how it's pretty much impossible for him to get scared from watching a movie or playing a game or something. When he was 9 years old, he watched The Ring by himself. I don't know if he really got scared, but he said the other day, not only does he not get scared by watching horror movies, no matter what horror movie it is, the general populace can say this is the scariest horror movie, or like it's genuinely unsettling. And he'll watch it by himself in the dark, and he'll try to put himself in a position to be scared, but it just doesn't scare him. And not only does it not scare him, he laughs and he giggles to himself. It got me thinking about something I heard. I think it was a podcast that I was listening to, maybe Distractable or something. They talked about how similar horror and comedy can be. There can be a circumstance where it has the potential to either be horrifying or hilarious. Something that is in a place that it shouldn't be in. It could either be funny or deeply unsettling. So back to the question, what makes something really scary? I've heard things like the unknown, jump scares, like boo, fear of death, any kind of phobia. There are a lot of things that are scary, but like horror scary. I don't know. The more that I think about it, the one thing that I think of is like when there's something in a place that it shouldn't be and not a lot of attention is being drawn to it. The opposite of a jump scare. I've seen a lot of horror games because I watch Markiplier. If I played these games by myself, I'd probably be pretty spooked. But, so yeah, let's not even talk about movies or books. Let's just talk about games. What makes a horror game scary? I think, well, like Lethal Company. That goes back to the correlation between horror and comedy. Lethal Company can be hilarious, but it's also absolutely horrifying.
It's an open vent.
When they added the mimics, the guys with the masks, that was one of the scariest things that happened to me in that game, was when I encountered a mimic for the first time. They were at the top of the stairs in the mansion, and like I was the only one alive. One of them turned, and then the other one turned, and they just stared at me, and it felt so personal. And you could say it's because it's in a game, so I'm the player, and like it's targeting me. But like, there's something about the lack of sound effects and attention being drawn to the scary thing that just like, because you have to notice it yourself, and if you notice it yourself, you question like, am I seeing things? Like, is this a threat? So you have to reason through it on your own rather than it being told to you, this is a threat, you should be scared. You have to come to it on your own. And I think that is infinitely more scary than, you know, something like a haunted house that you go to during Halloween season and there are a bunch of people dressed up in costumes and they just jump out and scare you. That is scary. But imagine going to like a straw maze. Nobody tells you that there are people dressed up in costumes and you're just going through, having a fun time, solving a puzzle. But then there's a person dressed up in a clown costume with a chainsaw who's just standing in the corner. That would probably get some police calls, but that would be so much more scary and it would stick with you for a lot longer. And it's not to say that jump scares aren't scary. You know, should I even say this? This is a little bit embarrassing. No, actually, this is not embarrassing because why would it be? You know the jump scares on the internet? They're the classic ones, the ones that have been around since like the early 2000s. Like the car commercial. I'm pretty sure like almost everybody knows about that one. I've never seen it, and there's a reason I've never seen it. So I'm 23. I'm almost 24, and I was a very small child when those things were going around the internet and people were showing their friends. The first one that I ever saw was when I was 2 years old, and it was a kitchen, like a dining room, looking outside of a giant window, like a sliding door. And my parents this is the first one I remember. They always tell me that my uncle showed me the first one that I saw, but no, it was my parents. So my parents showed me this one, and they told me to look really close at the screen and see if I noticed anything weird. And I knew that it was going to be scary because I was trying to look for like a face in a corner or something. At the end of the video, the face jumps out, it screams. It traumatized me for years. And when I say years, when I was 16 or 17, I finally got over the feeling, you know, when your blood runs cold when you see something scary. And no matter what you try to do when you see it, it just like the blood runs to your feet and you just go pale. That happened to me every time I saw one of those over the years. I didn't get over it completely until I was 16 or 17. So I, more than a lot of people, know how scary a jump scare can be. But I don't think, okay, I'm not really one to talk because it did stick with me for like 14 years. But I think the things that linger, at least with an adult, maybe it's different with kids versus adults. Maybe what scares an adult more is when something is not supposed to be there and you have to find it on your own. You notice it and you have to question, is that a threat? And you have to go through the reasoning. It doesn't trigger a fight or flight response. It triggers something else. Anyway, so I've asked a lot of people that, or specifically the question, how would you rank horror movies, books, and games? I think games have the potential to be scarier than anything. More than a movie or a book, I think. Because a book has to tell you. Like, it has to describe something to you. But I think it can make you feel pretty unsettled. Maybe a little more than I think it would. But depending on how the game is made, it has the potential to stick with a person. Lethal Company being the prime example, I think. I think what makes Lethal Company so good is like the lack of sound effects. You know when a game has sound effects like a what's it called? Just like the airy sound effects that aren't super in your face, but when you're supposed to see something scary, there's this sound effect that indicates, oh, you just saw something scary. I guess it's supposed to make you more scared or like more shocked. But imagine if the sound effect wasn't there. Because sometimes, at least when I'm watching people play games, sometimes when that sound effect goes off, I don't see the scary thing, I just hear the sound effect and I'm just like, oh, where was the scary thing? But like, if there was no sound effect and you see like a person walk around the corner or like a dark silhouette walk around the corner, as far as the game is programmed, it's supposed to be there, but you don't know that. All you saw was just like a black shadow walk behind a wall. I don't see a lot of games like that. There was one game that Markiplier played called Into Darkness. It's one of the scariest indie games that I've seen him play, but it had that. And the only time there was a loud boom that could be classified as like a jump scare, it was when he walked into the bedroom of the apartment and there was a mirror and then there was a flash of like a baby doll.
I'm gonna close that. Don't know why there's a peephole in that door.
So that could classify as a jump scare. But here's the thing. It wasn't the loud sound effect that killed Mark. Right before that loud sound effect, he saw his character in the mirror, and then the loud sound effect happened, and it was like, that thing that I just saw a glimpse of is attacking me. So at least that's how I felt when I watched the game. It would be a lot worse if I played it. So yeah, it wasn't the loud sound effect that scared him. It was the thing that he noticed by himself. He didn't know whether or not it was supposed to be there. And then there was one other time that was kind of like a jump scare, but there were no sound effects. He was getting a key or some object out of a closet, and it was a small closet, and he was faced inward. And there was a baby crying in the background, so that's creepy enough. Then he turned around and there was this thing standing right behind him, but there was no sound effect.
Oh, that,
It's really interesting, like, you can have loud sound effects if you scare a person first by letting them notice the thing, and then right when they notice the thing, then you'd put the loud sound effect in. When things are orchestrated, it's not like bad, but I think it's scarier, at least in my opinion, to have someone notice something and then have the loud sound effect if you're gonna have a sound effect. But not a sound effect that is out of place. I mean, besides the first jump scare in that game that I was talking about, if you have like a light bulb go out, like that's a loud sound effect, and that would, you know, jar someone. Now that I've rambled on for 30 minutes on this subject, now I can talk about the drawings. For Halloween, I wanted to draw something scary, but okay, so drawings is another medium where like horror can be integrated, and music, like there are a lot of mediums. So with these drawings this week, I've seen a lot of people use makeup brushes with like charcoal powder. I don't know why I haven't bought a makeup brush before this. I hadn't drawn anything with charcoal since like May or June, until a couple weeks ago in my last video when I drew the portrait of Jensen Ackles and then tried to draw those other things, and then I just ended up practicing with pencil and set the charcoal down for a second. But then this week I went to the store, bought a makeup brush, and I bought this particular makeup brush because the others have that block thing on it. It's like, get an associate in order to buy this thing, and I did not feel like social interaction that day, so it works really well. And with the ravens that I drew, it made it really easy because it had the effect that I wanted it to have, like the smokiness, which I've always wanted to have. It took me about 30 minutes to get the picture to the point where it could have been done. I don't remember exactly how long it took to finish it, but I think it took less than an hour. It might just be because ravens aren't extremely difficult to draw because they're black already, but I thought it looked really cool. So in a way, the makeup brush is a definite game changer. I used a big one and then a small one that kind of looks like a paintbrush. It's a concealer brush. The small one is a little tricky because it can either take away or put stuff on. I have yet to really figure out how to use that, and I realized this last night when I drew the other picture, the picture of the photograph that I took the other night. So here's why I talk about what makes something scary. On the surface, when you look at the photograph that I took in the mirror, it's not really scary. It's just like an out of focus selfie. So it's not really that unsettling, but I think it has the potential to be. And I don't know if it's because it's me or, you know, because it's the picture that I took and, you know, maybe I just take scary pictures. It didn't make me scared, but the fact that it's like out of focus and you can't really see my face and I'm kind of peeking up from the threshold of the dresser, that has potential. And so I was trying to take a photograph of something scary, and not just scary, but like unsettling. Because I could draw a scary picture, you know, like a scary face, and I could draw a skeleton, or because it's Halloween, I could draw a pumpkin, or like a Halloween scene, just typical stuff. But I decided to go with something that technically wouldn't be scary by itself, but that has the potential to be unsettling. And the risky thing with making stuff like that is that it can be a hit or miss. Back to the subject before, with like the typical sound effect when you're supposed to notice something scary in the corner. I think the reason they put that in there is so that you for sure notice the scary thing, because they don't want it to be missed. You know, they put a lot of work into these things, putting scary things in certain places, and so, you know, you don't want someone to miss it. It's not even just with horror, it's with any story. Like, if something is explained too much, you don't leave a lot up to the imagination. I can see why that would be a decision made, because you don't want people to miss something that you've put work into or put thought into. But I think risking someone not noticing something for the sake of allowing them to happen upon it, I think that's a risk worth taking. If you don't put a sound effect where something scary pops up, there is a risk of someone not noticing that thing in the corner, but someone will catch it. And especially if it's something that not a lot of people notice, the fewer people that notice something, I think the scarier it is, in my opinion. Especially with the internet, people can share things online. The fewer people that notice that scare in the corner, the more people think, like, is that part of the game or is it real? So it kind of like, I hope that made sense. But anyway, in trying to think of what to draw, I wanted that. The risk that I was talking about was someone not noticing something and thus not being scared. That is a risk, but I think it's a risk worth taking. So with the stuff that I drew, obviously the picture of the ravens isn't scary. There is a reason I drew this. Ravens are associated with horror and Halloween and stuff, so that's one reason I drew it. But it also is practice for something that I want to do in the future. This drawing was just like a practice run for the makeup brush, just to see how it worked, and I think it worked really well. It's one of my favorite drawings that I've done. Go figure. Then I went on to the next drawing, and I was gonna draw a porcelain doll. That's why I was photographing these mirror pictures at the dead of night. Porcelain dolls are very scary. If you can't tell by these videos, I really like warm lighting. Some shots may be a little too warm, but I like warm lighting because it's like there's a fire in the corner and it's really cozy. So I took a picture of that doll and it was pretty cool. There were a couple times I thought that the doll was going to turn around and look at me. There were a few that were a little bit unsettling, and I'll probably draw a picture of it later. But I don't know why. I just decided to go with this out of focus picture of myself in the mirror. It's not even that scary. If anything, it looks silly. No, that might go back to the horror versus comedy thing. You can barely tell what's going on. And that's the thing, going back to noticing things yourself. Or maybe it's just me trying to justify my lack of rendering skills. You can barely tell what's going on, but then once you can tell what's going on, maybe there's potential for it to be a little bit unsettling. I don't know. You tell me. All I know is that I showed my mom those pictures. I didn't think that they were unsettling when I sent them to her, and she was scared. You can barely tell what's going on in the picture, but oh well. Again, it's the risk that is worth taking. And it goes with any genre, including horror. But if more people just left things up to the imagination, I'm not even just talking about ambiguity. It's the same with drawing, with music. You can put a lot of detail in something, but at least, maybe it's just my opinion, the more something is left to the imagination, not necessarily interpretation, but to the imagination, which is probably the same thing. I don't know. I think that sticks with people more than if something is just like spelled out. You know, someone is afraid to leave something up to the imagination because they've thought about it and they want people to see the thing that they've conjured. And you can still put that in something, but maybe in certain situations it's best to put it in there and just let people find it. That is the best way I can put it. Oh yeah, I completely forgot to talk about the other two drawings I did. Oh well, I'll talk about that in the next video. There are a lot of things that I wanted to say that I didn't say. I did not think that I was going to talk about the horror genre and that question that I've been thinking about for years. The Raven picture may not be unsettling or scary, and the last picture that I drew of myself in the mirror might not be unsettling or scary, but I know that my mom was unsettled, so maybe someone else will be unsettled.